Awesome. Welcome. So this is our APAC EMEA timed orchestration demo on the 26th of April. And welcome. Our first item, Graham, your demo.
Sure. So I'm just going to share my screen. If Zoom will let me. Is this going to work? Perfect. Cool. So what I wanted to demo is basically where we're at with release environments. So what I'm looking at here is the release environments pipeline page. I'm just looking at all pipelines that have run on master. And we can actually see we are having mostly green. Not quite sure why that one failed. But we are basically having green pipelines. Oh, that was cancelled. That's right. Which means these are actually all coming from two stable branches. So I've done all the work, all the fixes and backports and everything now into 1511 and 1510. So some of these pipelines are actually coming from them. So it doesn't surprise me that the release tools bot is doing some work, although that's just the renovate running once a day. I should say source. I was hoping I can say it wasn't scheduled, but anyway. So if we look at some of these, for example, like you can see here, this, like if I look at this pipeline, or say this one from an actual GitLab developer, and we follow this back up. So this is the deployment. You can see here it's actually deployed to 1511 stable, and then it commits back the change. But if we actually look, this came from, and we'll look at this one as well, where these came from. Dave came from, this one was me merging, or Steve, I should say, merging a fix I did. Well, did that work? Did I click the wrong button? Yeah, here we go. Here's the stable branch pipeline. So the job on the actual stable branch itself, when the change was merged, we can see there's the actual start release environments pipeline, which is what we were just looking at. So that was 1511. And this one is a cherry pick, for example, into 1510. You can see here by these two downstream, this is us building the container images, and this was us actually deploying it. So, we can click this and we can see here that it's gone, triggered the deploy, and because the deploy was successful, it committed back the change to Git so that the Git state matches the deployed state, which we can also see here if we look in the commits of the repository. You'll see these update environments, skip CI. This is basically that commit back working. You can see here, it tells us which pipeline it came from. And this was the first one that was deployed to 1511. So I originally deployed the 1511 environment with the last version of 1510, because I got myself in an interesting situation where I wanted to get the 1511 environment ready before we made the branch, but I had nothing to deploy to it because we hadn't branched yet. So I just put the last version of 10 on there, and that's it getting upgraded to the first commit on the 11 branch. We can follow that and once again see this, and yeah, there's the 1511 stable deploy, commit deploy. Yeah, so that's all working. The 15.11.9, so 15.9 has an MR open to also get it up and running and fully into this process. However, so this is the MR. It's been looked at and approved by Mara and Steve. However, we're having problems with the packaging QA job on this pipeline. It's failing quite badly, and I'm not entirely sure why, because none of my changes touch the application itself. So I've tried to ping out to QA, I've pinged quality, and we're trying to figure out what we can do to kind of move this forward, because it should be safe to merge, but I do also feel a bit nervous about merging this when packaging test is in such a broken state. But anyway,
this also may not matter as much right now, Graham, because
sure.
this version in a month's time will drop out of security support. But actually we are, since we're not going to go ahead and extend the maintenance policy in the next month,
it's actually
this version will never, even if we extended it immediately, like, you know, in a month after, this version won't come into that. So it may not
we're
actually
doing a
matter.
security release on this now, I mean, in a week, right?
Yeah, sure. But isn't the problem that
and that's the problem with the stable branch. So the security release will not work.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So if we have other problems on state, yeah, exactly. I meant more for this specific getting these environments. Yes, absolutely. We should definitely get the.
It's unsure why this is failing, because this is very curious, because all the tests are failing with an internal server error, and this is against the just the little Docker image install, I believe, or it's an omnibus install or something. I can't remember what it is, but it's something that's runs in CI. So. Anyway, that is actually kind of, I guess, a bit of an aside. Once I get that MR merged, we could, in theory, then have the last 3 stable branches basically automatically deploying to a release environment. I'm also happy, obviously, with the potential focus on when we do extend the maintenance policy. I could just drop 15.9 and just say we'll only do release environments for the last 2 releases, just for simplicity. Like, we picked 3 because the original intention was extending to 3. But if that's not happening, we can just do release environments for 2. We can just do them for 1. You know, it's the choice is ours. I think it's nice doing it for anything we kind of do think we will have backports going to, just because it does. It's the point of it is to slowly build confidence in the pipeline being green, I guess, at any stage.
Yeah, exactly. And what we will probably we need to figure this out, but what we may end up doing for backport requests is, even if they get approved, saying to the author, yes, it's approved, you go ahead and do the merge, and using this same process would probably not be a terrible idea. We may have to think about that. Do you know, Graham, so I know you've got a stack of other stuff coming on your plate already, but do you know, in terms of that stable branch failure, is there an issue, or is there something that we can make sure that, like, there's an actual DRI, that maybe a quality DRI, getting that up and working?
All I did was follow the standard process, which is I pinged quality and said, look, I've got a backport here that's failing thing, and Dave, sorry, excuse me. They're kind of, I think, as much of a loss as I am.
Okay.
My MR is the only one that's failing.
Okay, it's just that one. Okay. Let me follow up with Steve and just get, because I'm not super worried about your MR, just because of the maintenance policy stuff, but I am more worried about the point that Alessio just raised, which is we do need the stable branch to be working with tests. But let me get Steve to worry about that. I mean,
all he should need to do, right, is just literally go into the pipeline create screen and run a pipeline on the stable branch now and see if it comes green. Because either it's green, and then in which case there's something funny with my MR, who knows? Or it also goes red, and in which case, but we need to get ahead of that, because
but it will not generate the same result, because the stable. So we need green pipelines on the backports for the security release, and those are merge requests targeting stable branches.
Yes.
And if we run a pipeline on the stable branch and it is green,
it is green.
It may run a different set of jobs, right? So
anyway, Greg, don't worry about that. I'm going to take this off your mind right now, because I know you've got so many other things on there. But let me, I do think we probably want to look into it, but let's get, I'll chat with Steve and get him to take a run on that one, as he's the release manager. Also, sounds like today with the staging upgrade, he hopefully has a really quiet day coming up, because he probably hasn't got a staging environment to deploy through. So actually it might be a good day for him to look into this. I
have a question.
Yes, go for it.
So you were mentioning the generation of the 15.11 release environment, if I remember. So that's the question that I have is, how much admin work do we have in this release environment to actually spin up new things? Because I remember on the day we did RC42 that I was kind of looking for the the new release environment to be there, right? So kind of we generate the stable branch. So wow, this is the first time we have real RC without having RCs, right? And it wasn't there. So I wanted to ask how. I suppose there is a manual thing to do, maybe creating the YAML file or something like this. But is it documented anywhere? Can we automate
it's not. I've got it to do, and that I was hoping to have it done. Well, I wasn't sure if I was going to get deploys working by the time timing of it all kind of didn't fall out as I expected. But yeah, by 16.0, it'll be a manual task. I'm happy to automate it because we're using JSON schema and like we've got very strong schema support. We should be able to automate it very quickly if there's a place. So I don't know, is there like a piece of automation when we create? Like I'm trying to figure out, is there a place in release tools I could automate? Like I could put this into like even just open an MR that there's just a release manager clicks approve kind of thing. I'm guessing it's like in the tag or the RC40.
It's in the public release classes. So there is a set of classes in release tools which goes under the name of public release and are all managed to do. They do the monthly release, RCs, everything that goes on-prems and not on .com. So there you can hook into the into that thing. I would say if you want to automate, don't do an MR, but just go with the generation of the. I don't know what you need. Maybe it's just a YAML file because that thing is automated, file. Right? So there's no click or approve things in that process. The release manager say create RC42, and it will do everything.
I see what you're saying.
Also creating the stable branch.
Yeah, sure. Okay. All right, cool. So that gives me enough to kind of feel out something. Obviously, I'll have to look into it and put up a proper MR for review. But I feel like for the moment, I'll make sure it's at least a manual something. So if I get distracted and don't get to it, that it's done or it's made sure people understand to do it for the next time. But yeah, ultimately, I think it should be relatively easy to just automate. It's just a GitLab API call and pass some stuff in. Once again, it will be the question of. We probably want to do it before the stable branch itself is created. So maybe there's a bit of trickiness of what version we deploy, but even just deploying the latest stable release. So like if it's 16, we deploy 15.11.4 or whatever it is. And then, and that means your first pipeline is also like a mini upgrade test, like going from the latest one to which also is probably not a bad idea to slip in.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Alessia, I was behind on my typing. What did you say that thing was called? We're going for
public environment, public release.
Public
release. Sure.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks. Just as an overview, Graham, because I for this recording, like so roughly on the release environments, could you just give like a very, very high level overview of like what happens? So someone commits. Someone's trying to commit to the stable branch. Like, what are the pieces?
Yeah, so this work will at the moment it only happens when someone actually successfully merges to a stable branch. So any MRs to a stable branch doesn't matter. We could expand to that use case later, but I think there's a different level of problems with that. So someone has got a review, they've merged to the stable branch. We've got our own child pipeline in the GitLab mono repo, which is where these stable branches live, right? So now in that repo, for example, there's a child pipeline that will set up a review environment if it's on an MR. And now we're saying we've got our own child pipeline that says when this is a stable branch, so it matches the stable branch pattern, add this other pipeline, which will do the following things. It will do a trigger into the CNG repo or a mirror of the CNG repo that's used exclusively for these non-official builds. And currently it is a mirror because, distribution, we're just unsure of generating new builds in the official repo. I think they just didn't have enough background information to feel confident with us just directly diving in and building into the official one, which is fine. And changing that later is easy enough. So our child pipeline the goal is to have three big things: build the images, deploy them, test them. So we've got the first two done now. So we have a trigger pipeline off into CNG. It's kind of like a mini stripped down version of auto deploy in a way, or that's why I'd like to see it end up looking like. But yeah, it just goes build the images, comes back, triggers release environments, passing in the data it needs to deploy, because now the images are built, it can be deployed. And then at the moment, it just stops. But eventually there will be one more step, which is running QA. Because QA setup, they do the whole repo per environment. They're not really dynamic and things like that. I won't be doing a trigger to a quality job. I'll actually be running the QA gem and code in an actual job in the pipeline. You know, in the future, if quality do offer what I would call QA as a service, where they could make it a bit more dynamic, then we would just trigger into whatever solution they have there. Are you muted, Alessi?
I'm muted. Does this mean the running the QA as from the code, that we no longer have the problem of the if you remember, I'm trying to remember as I speak. So we mentioned that in this setup, if we ever had to backport a QA fix, we will not be able to have a green QA pipeline, because the QA select the Docker image they're using or whatever is downloading the code by himself by the last tagged release on that environment. So we say if we backport something and we don't, until we tag, we will not be able to run. And so is this thing that you mentioned, running from code, overcoming that limitation?
It should. So I think I figured out a way where, because we already built the QA image earlier in that stable branch pipeline. So I will wire that up so it's actually that code that's getting run. So yeah, if it's like, oh wow, here's a flaky test, you just do another MR to the stable branch, you merge it, and therefore the QA is one-to-one. So it's not like, oh yeah, we're fixing that problem. Hopefully. I'll put a big disclaimer, hopefully. Until I see it working, I won't say it's fixed, but from what it looks like, that should be it. And that's what we want. We want to be able to say whatever the QA state is on stable branches, that's the test we want to run, which does mean that when we do this and start to see QA failures, we should be able to immediately go and because I mean, at the moment with the packaging QA, I think what happens a lot, I could be wrong, is when things go wrong or flaky, people sign off, but they don't fix, if that makes sense. They're like, okay, we know that's flaky, ignore it and just continue on. Whereas what we can do is we can say, well, because you could actually fix this, and we would deploy it again and make sure it's green this time. And, actually get, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just saying ignore it, it's actually get the backports in to fix QA.
Nice. That would be a huge, I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that, because even just that piece alone will be a huge improvement.
Yeah, it's not great. Like, I understand with the current setup how it is, but yeah, it isn't great where we're like, oh yeah, we just know this test is bad and there's nothing we can do. So
exactly.
And it's for poor quality. It's a lot of rubber stamping. Like, even when you ping them, you have to ping them to get them to rubber stamp it. But you both know, you and them both know that you both know it's a known issue.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Okay, great stuff. And we are still sort of ironing out all the kind of next steps, but on the maintenance policy extension, we are going to hold off on making the actual extension. A little part of the reason is we would rather have more release environments up and running before we do that to reduce the workload for quality. But it's not only that. So from the sort of the things I was thinking of, it's really about the unknown workload that it will generate once we start having 3 patch releases for release managers. Like, we're already overworked, so we have to deal with that first. But actually, Sam has also got some questions really about how much would this extension affect upgrade behavior. So he's going to do some more investigative work on actually the business sort of side use case and chat to some users and actually go and do a bit more investigation on what's going on over there. So we'll go ahead. We've got the patch release process pilot is running through this milestone. And before we get to the 22nd, we should adopt this process and actually just get this like locked in and have an easier, the stats show that it is quite a lot easier for us to do without having to do the merging, which is amazing. So we just need to wrap that up, basically get that documented. There's a few tools tidy up, there's some tech debt cleanup tasks that need to happen. So I'll catch up with Myra later. We'll get the EPIC organized to show that stuff.
So does that mean, like, that's all sounds good, and let's say that happens. Does that mean we would still draw the line and say 1510 or 1511? What was the pilot for? 1510, or was it for 15?
So we did. We did a
15.
pilot on 1510. We're now doing it for 1511.
But so will we say 1510 and 11 is developers merging, but 15.9 and earlier? Should any backports need to be done, that's still on us and the old way? Or do we just open it up for all of them to be developer-led?
I think that's probably to be figured out.
Yeah, fair enough.
We could probably do it on a bit of a case-by-case. It probably makes sense to open it up, but it may depend on that MR from your side, Graham. I think at this stage, probably whatever's easiest is probably the way to go. I think all of these things are a bit workload driven. So
yeah, fair point.
We could just do it on a case-by-case basis, to be honest, and actually see if we get something that's older than 1510. We could maybe just decide at that point, like, what's going to be the quickest way to pick this up if we accept it.
But it definitely sounds like 1510 onwards. Yeah, that's the process now. Yeah,
cool. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So yeah, feedback from engineering, like across engineering, has been largely no specific complaints. I think everybody's been reasonably happy with the changes, and I think from a release management side, there's been like, it's much easier for us to just not have that big delay. So that's great.
Yeah, I think from engineering is more predictable. They know when it's done, it's done. It's just a matter of when we release it, but it's definitely done. There's no way you're gonna get back to them and say, oh, it failed to peak or things like that.
Yeah, just exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So yeah, we'll try and get that stuff tidied up, but hopefully we can just lock in what we've got and move on to some other projects. Is there anything else that would be good to discuss today? Nope. Okay, awesome. Have some time back. Thanks very much. Great to chat to you both, and thanks for the demo, Graham. And